nothing really ever compounds in our African ecosystem except for mediocrity. How is it possible that our grandfathers or people who came before us sort of had better lives from a governance perspective than we did? So we had seen a capacity for collective action through this online community where about 1 million plus people from the diaspora came out to Ghana, and it generated about $2 billion worth of economic activity. We've not paid a single dollar in marketing. Most of our inbound interest has been word of mouth. We don't get intimidated by people who are excellent, right? Like, this is a place where if you're a master at your craft, you should feel comfortable coming here and thriving alongside other people who want to see you win and really thrive at scale.
Hey there, you're listening to Campfire, a podcast where we interview leaders that are building new cities and other new models of living for digital nomads, creators, and remote workers. My name is Jackson Steger, and I work with Cabin to develop new neighborhoods and grow a community of nature-loving creators and builders. Today's guest is Eche Emole, co-founder of Afropolitan. Afropolitan is creating a digital nation to enable all Africans to build abundant lives. They build themselves as the network state for the African Diaspora. It was fascinating to chat about their vision, roadmap, and day-to-day operations. Unrelated if you're a general contract type builder who's talented with their hands, or a naturalist who has built regenerative gardening or permaculture systems on properties before, reach out to me on Twitter at Jackson Steger if you're interested in living at Neighborhood Zero for free for a few months next year. Eche Emole, welcome to Campfire.
Thank you so much for having me, Jackson. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. I've got a full 1.5 liters of water next to me, and I'm going to do my best to resist the urge to drink all of it so that I don't have to run to the bathroom in the middle of this episode. Lots to talk about today, and really admire a lot of the things that Afropolitan is doing as we record. You all are in the midst of your first citizenship rollout, which is very exciting. I want to start with the very basics. What is Afropolitan and why are you building it?
Yeah, so what I would say is Afropolitan is a best-in-class network of the best that Africa and the diaspora have to offer across multiple sectors. While we may be a network today, our goal is to become the first ever internet country, a concept known as the network state, popularized by Balaji Srinivasan. A network state is a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that's able to crowdfund territory around the world and eventually become diplomatically recognized by pre-existing states. But yeah, that is Afropolitan in a nutshell.
Yeah, we've definitely talked a lot about the network state on the show, and just like he is an investor in Afropolitan, Balaji is also a backer of Cabin. So excited to see all of that alignment with you all. Why build a network state and a digital nation for the African diaspora?
Yeah, so I think I'll give our context, which is when I woke up last December 23rd, I'm in Nairobi, Kenya. I wake up at 5 a.m., I'm pacing the room, and then my girl's like, hey, what's wrong? I'm like, look, I know how I would look at someone who's about to tell you what I'm about to tell you, but I think we need to start a new country. And she's like, wait, what? Why? And I was like, things are not working for us. Like, the nation state experiment has failed for Africans globally, right? Like, we are in a situation where a lot of us are looking to immigrate out of the continent. There are not going to be enough visas for everyone, right? And then on top of it, our currencies are getting consistently devalued. We need a new setup from the ground up. And I think we also drew inspiration from the American founding fathers, right? Where Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, he says, is it possible or not for societies of men to form a new governance constitution through reflection and choice, or are we forever destined to depend on our governance through accident and force? And that was our why, right? No modern day nation state in Africa was created by reflection and choice. It's always been through accident and force, and we have suffered the consequences of that throughout multiple decades, right? And I think when it comes to either having our currencies devalued, the fact that we don't even have the same passport privilege as the rest of the world, the fact that we might not be able to get access to the same types of loans, refinancing, etc. These are systematic issues that we face from the top down. And I think our approach is knowing what we know now. If we could build a network state, how would we build it from the ground up? And that is our why.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Federalist paper example. Something that I heard Chika mention in a Twitter space once is that I think his name was Theodore Herzl,
Rehearsal,
published
yeah.
Yeah, der Judenstaat,
Juristate.
the Jewish
Hmm.
state, a
Yeah.
pamphlet-sized book in Vienna in the late 1800s. Some credit the book for being a helpful blueprint towards the eventual birth of the state of Israel. Is the Jewish state and the Zionist movement a useful model for you all?
Yeah, it's a useful model, and I think, like Balaji says, sometimes it's not to say that everything they did was great. It's just to say, like, look, this was a model where people who had shared purpose and values came together to build and create something, right? Another model is I just wrote an article the other day from shared DNA to shared purpose, and the model I was using was the Pilgrims who came on the Mayflower, right? The whole inspiration was, hey, we believe the Church of England is beyond redemption. We don't think it can be reformed. We're going to move over to the new world and start a new life, right? And they did that. And I think that's our own central argument, which is we believe the nation state experiment for Africans is beyond redemption. And we want to reorganize using this network state model from the ground up. And I think those are models that we pull some of our inspiration from.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Africa is the world's poorest continent. 9 of the 10 highest poverty rates are countries in Africa. In the U.S., where much of the African diaspora resides, Black folks face huge racial inequality, police brutality. I think it was a TechCrunch article where you said that the problem you're solving for here is bad governance. So can you expand on what you mean by bad governance? I don't know if that term is always like super widely understood, and like what's the relevant solution for governance that Afropolitan's proposing?
Yeah, so I think the analogy we try to give is picture a house that has a weak foundation, right? And the owners want to fix this house. But then they go into the house and instead of fixing the foundation, they say, you know what? Let's paint the walls. Let's fix the lights. Let's fix the fans. Let's fix the AC. They do all these other things, but never actually fix the foundation. And eventually the house collapses, right?
Mm.
In this analogy, the weak foundation is our governance, right? Our governance across Africa is poor, and because of how bad it is, it doesn't allow our other sectors thrive. So whether it's the fintech sectors, the agriculture sectors, or the healthcare sectors, all that depends on a functioning, efficient, or competent governance, and we don't have it. So the way we expand on it is our governance across Africa is experiencing a crisis of legitimacy, right? Take, for example, one example I could just give that was more recent. You had a situation in the Russia-Ukraine crisis where
Mm.
competent governments could go in and say, hey, if you're an American citizen, we have a plane waiting for you. Before the war starts, get on it, let's go. If you're a German citizen, we have a plane waiting for you, get on it, let's go. A lot of African and Black students were stranded in Ukraine because their governments are not competent, right?
Mm.
So for the most part, the average African navigates the world from the place of being a government unto himself. And to be
Mm.
honest, I think we've run to the point where that's level of anxiety, that stress, that feeling of being not being part of a community that can actually have your back. We're exhausted from that feeling. And I think for us, what we're saying is, how is it possible that our grandfathers or people who came before us sort of had better lives from a governance perspective than we did? Right. And I think our whole argument is when it comes to governance in Africa, the poor governance, it's a feature, not a bug. Right. And how do we know it's a feature, not a bug? Because we compare ourselves to countries who started after us. So I'm Nigerian, for example. Our independence was in 1960. The Vietnam War ended in 1975. That's a full 15 years after our independence. Look at Vietnam today. Look at Nigeria today, right?
Mm.
We compare ourselves to countries like the UAE or Dubai, right? In 1990, Dubai was a sand desert, right?
Hmm.
Look at Dubai today. Look at Nigeria today. So again, what we're saying is something has to change, and we've tried changing it through war, elections, revolution, whatever type of prayers, religious prayers. It's not working. So maybe we go back to the root and start over, and this time build it with more intentionality and reflection as well.
Cool. Switching now a little bit away from sort of the underlying motivations to the execution piece.
Yeah.
You have a on your website a 4-phased manifesto on
Hmm.
how you plan on executing the vision of forming the Afropolitan network state. Would you mind walking us through each of those 4 phases, starting with network?
Phase one is building up the network, and I'll just give you additional context. When we say building up a network, a lot of people, even some people in our community, don't even know why that's even important. They're like, why do you need a network? What are the benefits of having a network? But we see other groups who've established networks thrive in abundance from the networks that they've established. Again, going back to even the Jewish state, right? That diaspora network was set across borders, right? And it's followed and stayed with them to this day. right? And even maybe a network like the Freemasons, right? Those networks have been established over time and it takes them to this day. So we're looking to establish a best in class network of folks who are allies, our African diaspora, and people on the continent, right, across multiple sectors. And we want to seed those folks with our citizen passes that identify them as members of the group, right? And we're doing that through our NFTs, right? That's one. Phase two is what we're calling government as a service, which is GAS. And the whole idea is we want to build an Afropolitan super app that will enable members within our ecosystem be able to capture utility across the ecosystem. This app will be able to do things like self-sovereign ID, one company checkout from a jurisdiction perspective, things like remittances powered by crypto, things like risk capital. Are you able to actually go bankless, right? Because one of our arguments is when we interact with traditional systems or traditional finance, we start running into some systematic racism within these systems. Maybe instead of cajoling and pleading or negotiating for our work, why don't we just build a system that allows us to say, hey, if you're an Afropolitan member, we've set up a system powered by crypto that can say, hey, you qualify for this loan or you qualify for this refinancing. And we're building those systems within our own ecosystem. So that's phase two. Phase three for us is what we're calling the minimum viable state, right? And the way to think about that is how do we ladder up the legitimacy allowed to eventually be viewed as a country in the future? In September, we got recognized by the New York Stock Exchange as the first ever internet country. And that's just one way. So the whole idea with that is you're recognized by the New York Stock Exchange today. Tomorrow is the United Nations, right? You're laddering that up. And why that's very important is that was the first time most of us, in fact, all of us who came through for that event, which were Afropolitan members, had ever even gotten access to the New York Stock Exchange, right? So part of what we're saying is when you join this network, we want to be able to get you access to information, access to capital, right? And also access to just the network that allows you to thrive, right? And I think we want to unlock that in phase three. And also, a more recent example I just gave was the whole Russia Ukraine crisis, right? Competent governments could go in there, get their citizens out, but our governments could not, especially because they're already incompetent, right? So, what would it look like if Afropolitan was to say, hey, we have buses arranged for guys, for you people, join this Telegram group or join this Discord group, and let's get you guys to safety in either Slovakia, Romania, or even Poland, because we've arranged safe havens for our folks to get to safety, right? And it's just being proactive where our home governments are not proactive, right? That's phase three. Phase four is where we go for the diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. But we want to innovate on the land piece of this, right? So remember, the network state is online first, land second, right? And I think for us, what we want to do is combine two concepts, right? The first concept is an embassy. The second concept is a Chinatown. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, the U.S. embassy in Kenya, for example, is a sovereign territory in Kenya,
Mm-hmm.
and in Chinatowns they have their own post office, their own malls, their own banking, etc. We want to combine those two concepts together, and what that forms is a sovereign Afro town, right? And so let's zoom out, right? If you're an Afropolitan citizen, you navigate the world with your Afropolitan passport. You're able to get to make payments for goods and services using the Afropolitan Super app, and eventually get physical entry into Afro towns located across the world, because our border won't just be four corner borders. It'll be a discontiguous border that stretches across the globe. That's the vision at scale.
Yeah, I appreciate the clear and succinct way you walked through each of those. I've also found the Chinatown plus embassy model to be really helpful in underscoring the distributed archipelago that network states might have to experience. I want to go back for a second to the super app and phase two. I think the closest analog I've seen for something like this is maybe SingPass. Are you familiar with how Singapore facilitates their I don't know, sort of day to day governance and interaction with its citizenship? And is that a fair comparison?
So I haven't heard of SyncPass, but one of the comparisons we do use is WeChat out of China, where it's
Mm-hmm.
so integrated into folks' lives, and I think that's a more compelling example that most people in the world are probably familiar with when they hear of WeChat. But yeah, I think the idea is to again, like something like SyncPass that the Singaporeans use. That would be something similar to what we want to introduce.
Yeah, I was recently writing a piece about like the future of passports and this integration with not just the entry and egress from countries, but also your DMV certifications, your vaccinations, any interaction with like what we currently perceive as government agencies. If you can centralize that in a way that still protects user privacy is great. So moving on a little bit to this citizenship rollout that you're currently going through. So at Cabin, we've held off from formally launching a citizenship program. I'm bullish that we'll eventually do so, but I think we want to have a really concrete strategy in place. So I'm curious to pick your brain on a few things related to digital citizenship, starting with like, why is now the moment? Why does it make sense for you to go out and give these 500 citizenry experiences away? What are you hoping to advance for Afropolitan at this particular moment in time?
Yeah, so I've been asked this question, and I think some people were like, "Hey, are you trying to achieve, or are you striving for a utopia?" And I say to them that like, no, because where we're coming from, what we're really striving for is a baseline of competence, right?
Mm,
And we don't have that. So even just to set the standard for us, where it's a global standard, where okay, when you come across an Afropolitan, this is what you expect. This is how you expect to feel. This is how you expect to be handled from a service perspective. We need a global baseline competence standard, right? And so for us, I loved when Balaji highlighted that alignment is key for the
mm,
sort of folks you want initially, right? Because we've grown up in an age where social media allows us to think like you just run an ad or just run a Facebook ad or just run a Google ad or just run an ad. We've not run a single ad, right? Most of our inbound interest has been word of mouth. And we've loved to see that because when we're seeing people say, hey, my friend told me about this, we're looking to filter for that alignment, right? And I think our application process in terms of strategy is you go to our website, there's an application process, you apply, it gets reviewed by the team, and what we're filtering for with the questions we've asked is high alignment, right? So if you just come and you're like, hey, this looked good to do, this was great, I heard about I was just curious, then you might obviously not be one of the first 500, right? But when you come and you give a really good reason,
mm.
say that you have time to commit to this, you let us know your why. Those are some of the indicators that allow us to filter for alignment as we process the first 500.
Sure. And so then what is one able to do with Afropolitan citizenship? What might be a reason why someone would want to, other than that they're aligned with what you might have hoped you eventually build?
Yeah, so I think that the idea is that the first 500 citizens allow us to do things like set our initial code of conduct for the group and also do things like sign our constitution on chain, right? But remember in phase one, what we're building is the network, right? And so what we're looking to offer are benefits of early citizenship that will include things like access to a global community of professional builders who understand your needs, right? An Afropolitan peer support group that allows people to accelerate their journey as builders in curated peer working groups where they can learn and lean on each other. And these groups will meet like once a month, right? We also want to provide access to something we call Abundance Unlocked, where folks can gain insider knowledge and insights from industry leaders and cultural icons through hosted private seminars. Obviously, the curated meetups are also important. So we want to be able to bring together builders throughout the Afropolitan community at virtual and in-person gatherings, right? And also the most important one too is the access to our member-only platform that facilitates new connections with like-minded builders to share ideas and network, right? And I know some people might be listening to this and say to themselves, oh, maybe I already have this sort of thing within my community, right? And it's like, yeah, but for the African community at large, this isn't something that's been established globally, right? It's like in 2022, I think I'm always shocked how still far behind the 8 ball we are in
Mm.
certain things that are taken for granted in the West. And I'm like, look, we need to again establish a baseline of competence where you join this network, you get access to the sort of people who want to win and help win. Whereas in a lot of times in our backgrounds as Africans, we've dealt with a lot of scarcity, right? Scarcity of resources, scarcity of mind, and even just not being able to play long term games with long term people, right? Nothing really ever compounds in our African ecosystem except for mediocrity, really, right? And it's like there's no other way to put that lightly. And I think for a lot of us who want better, what we're trying to establish is a network that allows us to thrive at scale.
Yeah. So it's clear to me that you've been thinking about stuff like this since way before Balaji's book came out this July, and yet still like the conversation that he's sparked on Network States, the language that he's lent to this space, so much of it is still very philosophical and theoretical at this point. So
Yeah.
how are you making this idea of Afropolitan not just accessible, but even like known
to folks who aren't on tech Twitter 24 hours a
Yeah.
day?
Yeah, so I think it's, to be honest, it's been mostly word of mouth. We've not run a single ad, right? But I think it's also important to understand the context of Afropolitan. So we already existed prior to this particular manifestation of what we were building to. I think the best way to understand Afropolitan's journey is to think about it in three phases, right? Phase one Afropolitan was an organization I started while in law school in San Francisco Bay Area.